fully grown, man, but oh, it ain't long, but it sure is skinny, boy. I think the recap was here with this. We were going hardcore tape fabbing. So now we have the real thing. We have physical tube work stuff in here. Prep tubes, chromoly tubes, different wall thickness tubes, all of it cool, zebraed out, all the stuff in, all the tape is gone, all the structure's here. So let's get into it. Let's talk about it. Let's see what's here. We got to talk about the shocks. We got to talk about how the back windowsill is not how it was, and we'll start there. The truck's higher than it was. We've been working on some of the frame portions, but also one of the big things to, you know, start where we were last week was we had this thing taped up. We had a tube going from this outer chassis tube that goes from the C pillar and the B pillar and runs out towards the rear. That was just a straight tube going across. This thing had, you know, the weird kind of toothpick arms that we designed to work for the chassis. It was the Band-Aid that I said needs surgery. As far as the shock package that was on there, that was a 14 and a 16. Now that worked really well for what it was. I think we got the truck working probably as good as it could be. But it still was lacking like proper setup. So now what we have here is instead of a 14-16, which being the 14 coilover and the 16 bypass, now we have a 16 coilover, 3-inch instead of a 2.5, and we have a 4.4-inch Fox 18. So this is your proper setup. Now what that does, we're running a short wheelbase, 125, and a traditional 55-inch link. So the ratio is not like a crew cab style where it's aimed towards the rear axle, but it's put right in the sweet spot where it's going to be awesome for valving. So that raised up our shock mount scenario quite a bit, and you can see how high that is past the tube line here. And what we needed to do is kind of engineer a structure based on what would work to make, you know, run these shocks and still get that thing going. So I'm going to take this out before it gets me. So what we had to do is float a section. The best thing is to still respect that flying W. I don't know if we'll ever come up with a better term than that, but that's the term I heard years and years ago, and it's worked. It was from Kevin Mahan at H&M. This is your same kind of layout that we'd get, except we're taking this void out. So instead of having a tube go straight through here and be that back wall belt line tube, we're running this portion, which is your big gnarly B pillar to C pillar transition. This is a mitered tube with a partition. So this structure goes first, and that creates your new improvised back wall. You land your W to that, land your uprights back into this junction, and then also from here towards the rear lands into our compression down tubes. So now all we need to do here is float our shock mount. And I don't think we need some big bougie, gnarly, like worked structure into here. We just need to start from here and get back there, and that's it. I don't even know if we need some side stabilization. It's gonna do exactly what it needs to do. Just with a kind of a nice, you know, angular structure, diving from point A to point B, locating the coilover, locating the bypass. One thing we went into when we did our pre-running of design the last episode was the 4-seat configuration. That just didn't work. It was gonna be too tight. Even if you try to get the room back here for it, and keep in mind we're using a full shell seat, so it's not like we're trying to fit a side-by-side seat or just like a typical suspension seat back here. We're trying to get 4 full shell composite seats in here. And it just ended up being like the leg space. The driver and the co-driver would have to be so far forward to get these guys right. Like it fit dimensionally height-wise, but leg space was just going to be, really compromised. So went back. I called Eric when we started to figure this stuff out. I called Eric and I was like, hey, I don't think we're gonna be able to get 4 seats. And he's like, dude, it's all good. He's like, you were the one that wanted 4 seats. And then I'm realizing like, I'm the guy pushing to get 4 seats in an extra cab. I just like that concept if it makes sense. And it doesn't make sense when your legs are like at a weird angle that might compress your back when the thing G's out or hits bumps. And you know, that's the thing. Like even with Rangers, sometimes I'll see like someone might be sitting here and their legs are like flat. And if you think about like, say this is, I mean, that's kind of, let's do that. Say that's your back and this is your bum and this is your legs out here. And if you're sitting like this and you hit something where you compress, it is so much easier to screw your back up like that than it is to kind of have your legs bent or sitting in a sitting position, not a sitting on a flat floor. You know, having some kind of bend and some kind of foot bracing is so much more helpful in the case of impact. So you have to think about some of that, even with trying to fit 4 seats. Like, how are your legs going to be? Are they going to be hyper compressed? Like, are you going to be able to get out if the driver gets knocked out or people are hurt, if there's a fire, if there's danger, how do you get out? Are you going to be able to get out of something like that? If you're hurt, is someone going to be able to get you out of the car? There's a lot of tricky stuff. So back to being on the phone with Eric, he goes, that was your idea. I go, yeah, I know. And he's like, dude, he's like, I have a family of 3. He's like, that's how it is. So we're good, run 3. So boom, we're back to 3. Shocks are in place. Started on the seats. The first thing I want to show you before the seats is the frame modifications, and then we'll go back. The headers were built by Jeremiah down in Marietta. He's like a badass. He builds like 2,000 horsepower GTRs and Vipers, and he's one of those guys, twin turbo kits. Eric wanted to get the LSX 454. It's got some headwork, runs on race gas, but headers they can make power and they can also deduct power. So having the proper header system for the application is something that I've like kind of learned the hard way with before, you know, and making an extravagant design versus like, there's a science to those things. And for a long time, like, dude, you got big power, just make them however they go. And that's that. But when you're really trying to inch out your performance and just get the most out of it, you really need to navigate the waters of like headers and their math and the calculations to get like your optimal setup for what you're doing. And Jeremiah was the guy that did that. So, you know, that's a tri-Y, big primaries, tri-Y header design where it has 3 Y sections. The Y is the collector, right? So 2 in, 1 out. It's got 3 of those, tri-Y. That being said, I called Jeremiah, I go, hey, we need to shorten the headers. What does that look like? Because I don't want to shoot us in the foot. Where can I get a win with taking some length out of these so we can direct the exhaust in a new route versus what it had, because before it just had straight shots and dumps. And we want to get our packaging right and get the design right for what we're doing here. So followed his lead, wanted to keep the primaries as long as they could be, and then the secondary, you know, into the third collector, we could shorten. So that's what we did. The other thing is designing them where they come out of the car easy. Split the flange right down the middle. So there's you know, 2 primaries and 2 primaries. Those bolt up. They have hardware for all of them, so the seal's right. And then they also slip into the collectors now instead of weld. So we'll just have like a bolt and a tab to hold all that stuff in. That leads us to, where is the exhaust going? The chassis is open right now, so it only makes sense to do the exhaust first and really be able to lay out the territory and the real estate before we seal this thing. And then we're not only limited by what we did with the sheet metal, but we're also limited by working upside down on a car. And no matter what, you don't get the same results. So right now we have them shortened, and what they're going to do is they're going to divert through the chassis. I thought we could have a really nice design element. You know, you got to think this, I kind of talk down on manufactured frames just because they're mild steel. And I think that the steel is like a recycled steel because just the way it welds and stuff. I mean, I am definitely maybe not the most optimal welder, but I still have enough know-how where I can see the undercut and stuff, and just the quality of the steel on like a regular frame, it's whack. So adding strength to this is a plus. Tying things in a way that's integrated where you're grabbing multiple points and not just landing like one tube with a junction to it makes sense to me. But also this cutout that we have formed in here, that's going to be where the exhaust routes through. And it's also a win because then we can brace it with all chromoly plate in here. So we're almost adding a full brace, you know, like a gusset through here, and it's a design element. What that looks like, you go, that's a weird shape. And it is, but it floats this, and it doesn't get this too close. So not only can we get this portion of the exhaust out with a V-band flange on there, but it also doesn't get this so close to the frame where it's gonna like saturate this frame in heat. It doesn't have to soak like that. It can kind of have some pass through. So you can see we're gonna divert out of the V-band collector here where the header final collects, and then we'll float right through here, just like that. So there's a lot of room in the front and in the rear. It's kind of just our mock-up. We use this to kind of figure out the initial cutout of the angle, but we already kind of put a U-bend in here and made sure that works. The other thing to pay attention to was this tube, like this lower rocker tube, I guess you'd call it, making sure that the hole is off-centered enough where it doesn't want to clash the tube and the exhaust itself into itself. Well, double itself in. This is 3.5 inch. That's what we're going to use. I don't know if we're going to come out. We might transition into a 4 just for style points out of the cab. But what we got going on here, we're going to come out of the header, hit a turn, go through here, through the frame, float that. This will have to be another section because while you're building this, you got to be careful. How are you going to get this out? Are you going to build a structure that's just going to live in here? Because that's a no-go. You'll shit the bed. So designing this right where you know where to put a V-band, you know, where you can separate the thing and take it out is going to be key. And finding a kosher design for that is going to be right hand in hand. So running this tube through here, kicking, and I already kind of, before we even made the holes in this thing, I looked at this and I pre-ran the shape. I'm like, where are you sure we're going to fit all this? And 3.5 floats perfectly in between the pivot box and the interior portion of the cab. So we'll come through the hole, and then we'll bend, we'll run up, and then we're going to come outside on the extra cab portion, which I'll show you too. We shall grab the tape. The tape is one of the greatest quick communication tools ever. So you might be able to see the exit point on the frame there. Header, V-band. This guy hits, turns, runs through the frame, evenly spaced where nothing's touching. There's plenty of room, and air's traveling. And then we're gonna bank, go right to the pivot box. Don't block the bolt or the nut. And then what we're gonna get, this thing's gonna run in line. So first hit is it'll run right out through here against the rocker. Then your pivot, it's gonna kick and come up. All inside the cab here. And then the exit here, we're gonna have a bedside. It's shortened wheelbase, it's gonna overlap, so you'll get your style points there that are functional. And then we want to be able to get out before the shocks and everything. So this, I kind of drew this earlier. I wish I didn't, but I'll just leave it there for patina purposes, I guess. But having that exit be a big elongated like ellipse here is gonna be the win for the design on here. The thing we have to factor in is we can't fully exit out of this thing yet until we have the bedside on, because the bedside's gonna do a transitionary plane change here where it's gonna run this surface and then it's gonna start to progressively kick out towards the outside of the wheel. So we need to get that on, but we can at least build like all the way up to it, and then we can mount all the bedside or at least mock it up, get that thing done. The other goal here is I'm avoiding taking the cab off a bunch of times. I'd rather just build stuff, and that's why I have a list on the whiteboard of, you know, steps. I organize the list to what needs to be done and then take the cab off, and then what needs to be done with the cab off and then put the cab on. And then, you know, so we only should have it off 2 times. If we can scumbag Eric into powder coating this whole entire chassis, then we might have to have it off 3, but that's what I'd like to do. This is James' truck, his Final Frontier exit on one side from the old bedsides. And you can see what's going on here. It's not too much, but it's notched or it's cut or profiled into a bend. Stefan's big blue ox has a similar setup, but I like doing these where you set a bend up to come out of the surface, so you get a much more elongated exit path, and you get a much more interesting and kind of attractive shape if you just set that bend up where it's kind of rifling out of the truck and catching, like say you stuck a pipe out and the, you know, wind caught it and it melted it that way, and then you just trim it and it gets like a really dynamic shape. So Eric's, we're gonna do the same thing, but we'll do it to the bedside where it sticks out. And then when there's no bedsides on this thing, it'll just look like some crazy shit coming out of a patinaed F100. So I think it's a double win. It's just something different. I'm not keen to having the exhaust come out back there, especially for pre-runners. I get it for race trucks. It's great for packaging and things, but I think the aesthetic and the functionality of having like an exhaust come out on side profiles of vehicles makes sense to me. We'll move on. There's a lot of these around the shop. You can see like even, it's just filled with a lot of abstract sketches. So with the guys, for me, I can sit here and talk with my hands, and that's one way of doing things. I've probably had this talk before, but I can sit here and tell you I'd like this to go there and this and that, but until that's translated different through every person, and it's not a worldwide way of communication. And what I can do is if I sketch something like basic, and I just, while I'm sketching, I can talk about this, that takes whoever I'm working with into the same line of communication and the same perspective and line of sight that I'm working in. And it makes the process of like constructing things, especially when they're so design intensive, it gets that like connection better, where it's not like, well dude, I told you I wanted it to look like this and that, but yeah, I told you. To tell you is not to show you. So if I'm able to show a little bit, it just makes things more efficient. And if I just spend a couple minutes here sketching on something, I go, I think that's it. And even if I sketch it first and I walk over to one of the guys and I say, I think it should do this, I'd like it to look like this, and I walk through a visual paper, it's a no-brainer. So it's something we use every single day, all day long. It works. That's definitely not my pen if it's got a green tape on it. It's kind of dark arts. I am going to, well, let's look at this first. This is the stringer system for the seat brackets. What we're gonna do, like we talked about, is run kind of bigger, longer runs of aluminum panels in here. No like triangles welded. I have no objection to that. I just, for Eric's, I want to kind of do something different and mix it up. I know someone asked about why don't you do the silicone bronze panels like the rest of the trucks, and some of that is just, it's extremely labor intensive, and we're kind of building this thing as like more of a toy instead of like a sealed cab pre-runner, where this will be sealed, but not like something where you silicone bronze it and it's part of the truck. And more than that, it's just about doing something different and trying something new and trying something that we haven't done and just seeing how the results are with that. It's just you know, it's when you're in a place like this and in a position like this where you can exercise doing something different or just trying a different way, then why not do it? It's exciting like that. So back to this, running a lot of aluminum paneling in here, probably like a 90 thou or something. This is a landing pad for the seat brackets. So what we'll do is, that's the foundation and the structure. This is all chromoly plate. We'll weld that in. Big nut plates, and I don't even know, we might not run nut plates for the seat mounts. I think it's safer just to run a straight bolt and nut, and that's one of those ones where someone has to be under there and capture it. And you just say, start from the, you know, passenger top, and you just, someone goes under there and tightens it, and someone's holding a wrench. But for a seat situation, I don't know what the load of a nut plate is, but it just makes more sense to capture bolt and nut. So anyways, this is your foundation. It's built on tangent. So then when we lay down all the paneling still runs flush and runs right with the tabs we're gonna put on. And that doesn't upset that. And then we just drill holes right where the brackets are gonna go through the panel. So the brackets also hold down part of the panel, and we don't have to have any kind of tabs in that area. And that seat is just floating on like a clean space. There's no like tubes coming up. There's no like tabs we have to trim a panel for to slide over. It's just a streamlined thing. We can, you know, run powder coat on that panel, and then boom, our brackets can have a coating, and we can just bolt it right there, and it's just like a clean, streamlined, floating seat. We will do the same thing with the passenger, and then we just have to navigate the waters a little differently with the driver. because we're gonna want that thing to move forward and move rear and then also go up and down. So let me get the seat. Kind of see how this thing works. Ew, woo, ew. Find it or grind it, brother. Find it or grind it. So, third seat. Kind of wanted to start from the rear. Got to float these a little bit, but just to be able, you know, if you got to think about this. Once you keep building this thing out, it gets harder and harder to get towards the center. So just like putting the seat in, working on the shock mount simultaneously. There's also a harness bar that we built for that. Really important for me too, and it's just an opinionated thing. Running a harness bar for shoulder straps versus eyelets is huge for me. So I believe in that. Everything that comes out of here will be like that. You'll obviously start to notice that. But anyways, this is the start of the bracket. What we're gonna do is just build another brace in here, like a 90-degree wall. We might even just do the center, but it makes more sense to do the outside edges. And that'll just mean we'll almost triangulate this. We'll put a support wall into here that'll taper off, and that's gonna add that rigidity. But you can see there's 4 captures here, and then just your typical seat bolts. So if you needed to just take the seats out, you could leave the bottom brackets on and just undo the dehumidifiers here. But this is if you wanted to take like the panels out and all that shit from there. So that's on. We got some stuff to cover up front here, which we can segue into. Okay, 2 things here, well 3 things. We talked about aerotube. You can really tell the truck is higher now because I feel very vertically challenged. Aerotube on the intrusion bars as that signature hit. But first, remember we talked about this bend last time. Also talked about this bend and landing gussets to it. So this is our 2-inch gusset. With this, I really like to draw the weight of this gusset instead of doing a perfect triangle where, you know, from this end point to this point, say that's 6 inches. And then you need to make this end point to this end point 6 inches. I don't think that the design and the functionality of the design makes sense like that. I think if you're holding this ledge up and you wanted to, like, say you needed to prop that thing up for support, and you know this thing has pressure coming down and it wants to go in, then instead of running a prop like that or even 45, you'd want to do it where it had a little more leverage and support drawing into the vertical structure. So that's why you see, like, this is, you'd call this like a drawn out radius gusset, right? So the compound of the radius starts up here and then it draws into the tube, the vertical, the upright. And so that's where we're at with that thing. That thing's in. It's a lot going on up here. We'll cover this in a second, but right now we'll cover the aerotube. Streamline aerotubing, if you guys are interested in that stuff, you got to use it wisely because it's not available in very thick wall. So you have to think about, you really kind of look at engineering and structural engineering. There's plenty of books out there for that. But also just thinking the physics of things and what support needs to be drawn from certain areas. Use it accordingly. It is expensive as shit, but it's a great element for us and my background and my family background and everything to really incorporate this aerotube for the intrusion bars on our cages. And every truck that we do that gets a spec MC1 cage will always have aerotube intrusion bars. That being said, those are in. The last appointment for at least the belt line and the, you know, A-pillar wall is going to be this portion here. And I'm going to hop out and explain it. Dash instrument panel on this thing. Fiberworks Navi Dash, off the shelf guy. Nothing crazy. Again, like this is going to be a different look. It's not going to be, it'll be nice and polished, but just in a different way where it's really kind of, I think it's going to be more representative of like a sand car, but with, you know, windows and doors and stuff like that. So it's going to have that like nice powder coated appointed feel, but just more of a toy than like a luxurious get in it and go, you know, drive out to the beach and get a steak and go in the desert in 100 miles an hour. It won't be that. I mean, you could do that, but I think it's going to have a different vibe and I'm excited about it. Back to the dash, Fiberworks Navi Dash from Jason. That thing is it works well in F100s. I've seen it. I know Eric Reynolds has it in his F100. And it's been in a couple different cars. It's kind of got two main sections for displays and instrumentation. And then what we'll end up doing is this is our last like structural tie-in that we need. We really want to go from this junction and we want to tie into that bend. That's kind of the weakest links there. So I'm going to wait till we get the dash. And then what we're going to get is we're going to be able to profile this dash, and I'm hoping that it can kind of land in the portion of this tube here where that bend is. And then we'll build a plate structure that's boxed, all chromoly plate, that'll be a gusset, but it'll also double as like a profile holder for the outside of the dash. So a lot of times those dashes, when you have to trim them to spec to fit into the truck, or they're too wide or vice versa, or they're too narrow, and they have like either a gap or a really unfinished edge on the outer corners, we're gonna alleviate that because we'll be able to set this in here and we'll trim it where it hits nice, and then we'll build this gusset out to tie all this in functionally that matches and is tailored to that dash fitting in there. And we'll probably just pop some mesh in here just to let the thing breathe and all the electronics breathe, and style points, style points. Couple quick things to look forward to. So like header mod's done, frame passageway for exhaust out of the cab not done yet, shock mounts halfway done, limit straps for the rear, windshield corner gussets done, and then we have a pull cab. So like I talked about, just figuring out a method here of what we need to do in order, so we're being efficient with pulling that cab, not pulling that cab. Things to look forward to for next episode we'll go into. Alrighty, next episode, what to look forward to. So what we need to do before next goal is to get the cab off. We'll film an episode when the cab's off because we all want to see what that looks like. Bring it outside, look at its stance, look at how it feels. But before that, let me get that cell phone out, things making a noise. Before that, shock mounts. For sure, get all the shock mounts addressed. All the big chunky fabrication here, get that addressed. As far as welding, there's a lot. The whole roof needs to be welded. There's root passes in most key areas, but there's just final welding that needs to be done. I want to get the shock mounts in, the exhaust ran as best we can right up to here, and then we take this thing off, weld this all completely out. 360 weld it, double pass, all the stuff. And then we put the cab on. We start to tie in the body and tie in the panels and really dress it. So I think just that enough is the step that you'll be able to catch back up on. This is Colin's job. So I do the design direction here, but I haven't touched it other than that. And it's, again, to Colin, super proud of him doing a crazy good job. He's got a single cab F100 that he learned on at his house, that he put his time into. But this is a really awesome thing to see because I am working on other stuff that needs attention, and for me to check in with Colin throughout the day and be able to just delegate design and then watch it happen is super impressive and very gratifying as a business owner and a fabricator. So anyways, thank you guys. Like, subscribe, comment below. Let us know if there's stuff in here you want to see. We pay attention. Have a good Monday.